Hey there, today on the Safety Geek, we're talking about managing safety policies. And I have a 10-step process that will not only save you time, but it will increase your management support and your employee engagement. All right, let's get to it. This is Safety Bri, your number one safety geek. Why do we have the behaviors that we do? Superheroes in the workplace, right? All of those things that go into making you an effective safety manager. I love what we do. Motivation, learning, teaching, training, teamwork. I geek out over that just as much as I do safety. Hello, and welcome to the Safety Geek. My name is Bri, your number one safety geek, and today we are talking about something that takes up way too much time on your to-do list, and that is managing your safety policies. Now, we're not going to talk about writing safety policies. I have some episodes on that as well, but I'm talking about managing them because when you have a full-fledged safety program going on and everything is in place, you end up with lots and lots of safety policies. I would have an entire bookshelf full of safety binders. So with each one of those policies, it actually creates work on your to-do list because they have to be maintained. They have to be updated. They have to be accurate at all times. In fact, this is one of those problem areas because when you kind of look at the prioritization of your to-do list, updating those policies falls down to the bottom of the list because they're pretty much in place, but I don't want to take the time to update them right now because I have to go stop injuries from happening. And that is 100% true. But when OSHA comes knocking, one of the first things they want to do is sit down and read your policies before they go out onto the floor and do their inspection. So having those policies up to date is extremely important. I would say it's critical to your success in an audit or in an inspection. And what we tend to do as safety managers is we wait until that happens and then we try to update 20 of them all at once. So I want to talk to you today about creating a process to actually make this simple and to try to take some of those to-do lists or to-do items off of your list. So first, the basics of managing your policies. So this is like the bare bones minimum that you should be doing is that you should only have written policies when regulations require them, or you have written policies whenever you have a high hazard situation, a high frequency situation, or your trending data shows a relatively high non-compliance. So if you don't have written policies for those areas, that kind of triggers that you're not taking them seriously to an auditor or to an inspector. So even if regulation doesn't require it, if it is a high hazard area or a high frequency injury rate area, you should still have a written policy for it. And everything else, anything else that is not required by regulation or high frequency, everything else just falls under a JHA or a JSA, whatever terminology you like, or an SOP, a standard operating procedure. And then the fourth thing about the basics of policy management is that you have to have easy access to them. So you want to make sure that the people that are affected by the policy actually have access to the policies. Now, I want to get into the fact that not all regulations require a formal written policy. I urge you to actually go to the regulation and see, does it require a written policy? Because too many times what we like to do is just put it down in writing and create a policy for it. And all you're doing when you do that is creating more work for yourself, not just in writing the policy, but then you're also creating work in the updating of the policy too. Where if you just put it into an SOP instead, it ends up making it easier. Because then it's not like a formal policy, it's something that's reviewed more regularly. Like SOPs are generally reviewed a lot more frequently than policies are, or even read more frequently than policies are, right? Because before you go do a task or a non-routine task or training and things like that, you're looking at SOPs, you're looking at JHAs. It's a better place for a lot of things to go into instead of a formal written policy. So try to make that distinction. when you are deciding, do I need a formal policy for it? And I want you to understand that I fell into this trap too. I basically went through the regulation book and for every subpart created written policies, when a lot of times they're not even required. And it wasn't until my corporate office, I was working for this company that had a corporate safety department, and they sent down this policy on machine guarding that was 80 pages long, that I just kind of sat back and I was like, machine guarding doesn't require a written policy. Why would I put this in place and add this work to myself? So I actually questioned my corporate office on that and changed the way that they kind of looked at it as well. So we're not going to get into what machine guarding requires, but it definitely does not require a written program. So it was kind of like, I don't need all of this. They took the regulation and basically put it into a policy, which was nuts. So I strongly urge you to kind of look at what you're doing and saying, is it even required? Why am I putting this work in front of me anyway? All right, so if you don't have a process for managing your policies currently, I want you to take a step back and I want you to do a little bit of pre-work before we get into my 10 steps for managing your policies. So if you are just kind of like, I write the policy and it sits on the shelf and I never touch it again until I get a notification that an auditor's coming and then I update it, right? If you don't have a process, the pre-work that you need to do is first make a list of all the regulations that your company falls under. What regulations are applicable for the work that you guys are doing? And it might be general industry regulations, it might be construction, who knows? It could be EPA regulations, it could be DOT regulations. Make a list of every regulation that your company falls under. Step 2 is to cross off the ones that don't require a written program or a formal written policy. So that way you're taking some of the work off of your list right now. The ones that have a high frequency rate or that you have a high non-compliance, you can keep those on the list. But all the others, like if you have machine guarding on there, you can cross that off unless you have a super high frequency rate on that. And then you're going to add in any company-specific policies. So a lot of companies will have their own policies on like how you handle accidents and injuries, workplace violence, emergency preparedness, things like that don't necessarily fall under a regulation, but it's a company policy, so you want to add that to the list, all right? And what you'll end up with is a very long list of policies. I know for most businesses, it'll end up being anywhere from 15 to 30 different policies that need to be written. And then what you have to do is review them periodically. That is basically what the rule says. Very few regulations actually say that you have to review them annually. But there's a misnomer out there that policies have to be updated annually. If you have 30 policies and you want to update them annually, that's a heck of a lot of work. So what I want you to do is define periodically for yourself. You actually get to define this yourself unless the regulation specifically says a period of time. So as you're doing your pre-work, you're looking at the regulation, you're seeing if it requires a formal written policy. And then during that section, it'll also tell you when it has to be updated or reviewed. If it doesn't specify, then you get to define that. And that definition can be 1 year, if that's what you prefer. If I only have 10 policies, a 1-year annual review is not that big of a deal. But if I have 30, I may want to spread that out over 3 years. And I know what you're thinking. 3 years? No, policies have to be updated every year, Bri. You don't know what you're talking about. That is not true. Question that thinking. I highly recommend that you review your policies once a month. You pick one policy a month and you review it for that month. And so if you have 24 policies, they get reviewed every 2 years. If you have more than 24, it's every 3 years. I wouldn't go longer than every 3 years because I was on an OSHA inspection one time when I was an SGE and they were reviewing their policies every 5 years and OSHA was not happy with that. They understood that it was meeting the regulations, but they really wanted them to do it every 3 years. And they had lots of policies. For them, it probably would have been like 2 policy reviews a month. But OSHA was still like, you really should do it every 3 years at a minimum. So the thing is, when you spread out your policy management and over from a 1-year period to a 3-year period, all you have to do is have have it written down. You just have to have a process. You could have a guideline or a memo that says we review all of our policies every 3 years, with the exception of these 2 that get reviewed annually per regulation or something like that. So you get to define periodically. I want you to own that. I want you to really embrace that, because updating policies does not help you do what you do best. Updating policies does not necessarily prevent injuries, making sure that the phone number in the policy is accurate. So what you want to be spending your time on is stopping accidents from happening, not doing the paperwork part of safety. So if you can spread that out, that's always better. So please embrace that. I know that that's kind of a change of thinking and what most people think. All right, so my 10-step process for managing your policies. And you might be like, why would it take 10 steps? You'll see, because we're going to entwine management support and employee engagement into your policy management. So step 1, you choose your policy for that month. You do one policy every single month. What is your policy for the month? You pick it out, you read it. And I mean, you read it. If it's an 80-page policy, God help you, I hope it isn't, but you read the whole thing. I try to keep mine like 10 pages, but keep it simple, my friend. You put too much in there, you're kind of handcuffing yourself. But anyway, you actually read the policy and you say to yourself, are we actually following this? Is this accurate? Is this what we're currently doing? Does this reflect our current operations? Any contact people that are in there, any titles that are in there, any phone numbers that are in there, you want to make sure that they're accurate. Yes, call those phone numbers. Make sure that they are still active lines. All right, so make sure everything in the policy looks good to you and it's up to date. Now, you may just find some typos. I generally always find typos every time I'm updating my policies. It does not matter how many times I have read them. You can never find 100% of those typos. I bless the word check and the spell check in Word, and I use Grammarly, and I still find typos every single time, right? So make sure that you have it up to date and that it's meeting what you believe is a good policy, right? Your step 2 is to make step 2 is making all those updates. So we're 2 steps down. Step 3 is then to share it with a couple of employees. Grab 1 or 2 employees that are affected by the policy and ask them to read it and say, hey, is this still accurate? Does this still apply to what we're doing in the workplace? Do you have any additions or changes or recommendations that we should add to this policy? And I love to do this in the break room. So I will sit in the break room and as people are like maybe taking a restroom break or something, I'll be like, hey, can you help me for a second? And I'll pull them aside and I'll take 15 minutes with them and have them read part of the policy. And I might even do like 4 or 5 employees because I don't want to take up too much of their time, especially if it's a very large policy. I might have them read sections, have like the first person read the first few sections, the next person read the next few sections or whatnot. So that way I'm not taking up too much of their time. Remember, we want to have small asks. We don't want to ask them to take on a huge task. We just want them to take on a small little 10-minute task, read this policy, tell me if there's any recommendations. All right, and then you update it with whatever recommendations come out of that employee review. Next step, you're now going to share it with the management team. You're going to shoot them an email, you're going to send it to them, and you're going to say, hey, I'm updating the policy. Can you please read through this and make any recommended changes or tell me if it's okay? A lot of times they will ignore you. Unfortunately, this is true. So you have to follow up with them in person. You have to go to the managers that you send it to and ask them personally, did you have any recommendations? If they did not, send it back to you. And if they say, oh, I haven't had a chance to read it, give them a deadline and say, hey, I need to get this to the executive team by this date. Can you please give me a response by this date, right? Giving you a good leeway to make any changes. So make sure that you go to them in person. It makes such a huge difference, all right? So now you are going to make any of the updates and any of the recommended changes that came across from the management team. And you're going to update your revision date at this point, because at this point, the policy is pretty much finalized. So you want to update your revision date or your version number. So we'll get into version control in just a second, but you do want to manage versions of your policy. So at the bottom of your policy, I like to keep just an update date, but you could also do like version number. So V1, V2, V3, whatever it happens to be. So make sure you update those. And then you're going to take it to your executives for the final approval, because pretty much at this point, they're not going to make any changes, but they do need to approve it, because that is how we get management support. Not just having your department managers review the policy, but then taking it to your top management. I like to call it the executive team, the people in your C-suite. Now, if you're a smaller business, you might not have CEOs, but you have the general manager of the business, that type of thing. When you take it to them, what you're telling them is that, hey, I reviewed it with 3 employees. I reviewed it with these department managers. All changes were made. Please, do you approve it? And generally, you might get them to sign off on it. So that way you have a signature that it wasn't just you doing the policy update. They approved it as well. Once you have that final approval, then you update any of your forms, your templates, your inspections, your training materials to reflect any of those changes that you made in the update. And then you publish and distribute. Publishing and distribute means telling everybody who needs to know about the policy about the change. You can't just change the policy and throw it up on the shelf and not tell anybody about it. That is a legal nightmare if something happens. I will tell you, my friend, I have been in depositions where they asked when a policy was updated and how I communicated it to the employees and to show proof that I communicated it to the employees. So when you update a policy, you need to communicate it. Now, you don't have to get every single person to sign an acknowledgement statement. I would only do that if you were making a major change in process to the policy. Then yes, you get everybody who is involved to sign off that they acknowledge the change in the policy. But if it's just some little tweaks here and there, and it's just a every 3-year update, what you're going to do is send an email, or you're going to post it in the newsletter, or you're going to put a posting up in the break room. Hey, this policy was updated. This is where you can find it. And if you want to see the exact changes, here's a link to the red line version of that policy, right? Something like that. And then you take pictures of what you did, you save copies of what you did, and you go, here, this was the notification of the policy change. It sounds tedious, but I will tell you, you don't want to be on that side of the deposition when they ask you to prove that you communicated it to the injured worker that didn't follow the policy. So now, like I said, if it is a major change in process, you're using new chemicals, you're changing it from like you'd get a write-up to now you're going to be terminated. You're changing the PPE that's required. Those are going to require a sign-off on an acknowledgement statement. But most policy updates don't fall under that, because when you wrote the policy, you weren't having to make all these changes, right? You made all those changes at that time. Now you're just updating it. You're just reviewing it, making sure it's still accurate, maybe tweaking some wording here and there. And that's about it. But they do need to be notified. And that is the 10 steps to policy updates. So let me go through them again. I don't have them numbered on my list here, which is what I should have had them numbered. I haven't bullet pointed, but so you're going to read your current policy, make any updates. You're going to share it with a few employees, make any updates. You're going to send it to the department managers and have them review it and make any updates. Don't you see a pattern there? You're going to get final approval from your top management, or your executive team, as I like to call them. And then you're going to change your revision dates and your version dates. And then you're going to update any forms, templates, inspections, observations, training materials. Then you're going to publish and distribute. Because, as you can see, it does take a process. Getting those reviews will help you get management support and employee engagement, but it does increase the time it takes to manage your policy. I could have easily stopped at reading it and updating it myself, but that does me no good. It doesn't get me the support for safety. So following all 10 steps does take longer, but in the long run, it pays off in your safety culture. And this is why I suggest you only do one policy a month, because it takes time. You could just every month you move on to another policy, then another policy, then another policy. And then them reviewing policies just becomes a way that you do business. They expect it every month. Like, yeah, every so often, the safety person's going to come to me and ask me to review a policy. That's how we do business here. That's how everybody stays engaged in safety. And then guess what? When OSHA comes knocking and talks to that manager and says, hey, do you know this policy? Yeah, I helped review it. I helped write that policy. Everything comes full circle, my friend. All right, before I leave you today, I want to go over two more things. One is access to your safety policies. So a lot of safety managers keep their safety policies in a shared network drive within their computer system, which is great. It works wonderfully, right? The problem is the people that need to see the policies, the workers, the ones that are held accountable to the policies, the workers, they might not have access to that network drive. So how can you tell them that you're being held accountable to something that they can't easily access? This is why I like paper formats of my policies. So yes, I do keep them digital, and I do that for version control, which we'll talk about next. But I like to print them out, have them in a binder, and then where I keep my policy binders is especially important. You don't want to keep them locked up behind your desk. You don't want to keep them in a manager's office. Treat them like you would your SDSs. You want your employees to have easy access to them. So maybe put them on a bookshelf outside your office, so that way you can easily spot if something's missing. You could totally Six Sigma that and put markers as to what policy goes where, so that way you know when something's missing. But having them easy access where it is just right outside your office, or even in the break room if you wanted to, put the bookshelf there. It doesn't matter. You just have to make sure your employees have access to it. That's just being fair. Why would you want to hold them accountable to something that they can't easily access, that they would have to go to a supervisor and say, hey, I want to see the policy on lockout, tagout. So that's automatically triggering to them that, oh, maybe they think there's something wrong. And then you've got a retaliation issue started and whistleblower and all of that. So it's much easier if you just always give them access to it. The next thing I want to share with you is version control. So I want to tell you a story. I was the safety director of this co-op, and we were a very large co-op, and we were larger than Ocean Spray is what I love to tell people, because we really were. But anyway, there was an accident that happened way prior to, like 12 years before I became the director of safety there. And the injured worker had been just working through the workers' comp system. He had a lawyer, but he didn't want to settle. He just wanted to keep his payments coming, and he was fine. His medical was covered, his payments were covered. He was 100% disabled from this accident. So at some point, he decided he wanted to settle his medical claim, and that required an attorney to get involved. And the attorney immediately came to me and said, well, I want to see the policies on fall protection that you have. Well, at that time, I was the safety director and I had all of my ducks in a row. I had an amazing fall protection policy. But if I had shown that to him, it would have shown us being negligent in his accident because we weren't enforcing this policy at that time. And I was like, I can't show you the current policy. His accident happened 12 years ago. So you want to be able to go back and be able to show the policy that you had at the time of the accident. And don't think just because an accident is closed, it's never going to come back to haunt you, because it will. You will always have that rare case. Now, I know my sample is an extreme example. 12 years is a really long time. But ever since then, I always keep version control of my policies. It could be just having that version number down at the bottom and having the revision date. But here's the thing. A lot of people think that version control is difficult, that you have to have fancy software or something like that. You can literally just use Word and the way that you're saving your folders. So the way you're saving the documents in your folders. So I would have a policy folder, which would have all of my safety policies in it. And then I would have an archive folder or a legacy folder. Legacy is what I put was like before me. This was everything before me. I would throw into the legacy folder. And then archive was anything that I created. So then as I'm changing policies, I use the review process within Word, which will actually mark up the document and show the changes. And then I save that version into my archive. So that way I can actually show the red line version of what was changed in the policy on what date. And then within that archive, I also save how I communicated the new policy change as well. So it's all in there. So if you do ever get called for that deposition, you have all of your ducks in a row. I will tell you, I'm always more scared of lawyers than I am OSHA inspectors. Because if you think about it, that claim could end up costing you millions. And even a willful with OSHA, I think is what, $132,000 right now. So the lawyers can cost you a heck of a lot more than OSHA can. So I'm always scared of them and trying to go, what would a lawyer be asking for? What would a lawyer be needing? And making sure that I have everything in a row. So just realize you don't need anything fancy. You could do this with Word. Alrighty, my safety friend, that is what I have for you today. I hope that you found this helpful. If you like these ideas, make sure that you head on over to the show notes at thesafetygeek.com/46 and tell me about it. Tell me if I missed something. Tell me what you like about it. Tell me if this changed your life. I would love to hear from you, and I will chat with you next week. Bye for now. Hey there! What did you think about this week's episode? I would love to know. Hop on over to thesafetygeek.com and leave a comment and rating on this week's show notes. And while you're there, click on that little share button to tell your friends about it. Thanks, and I'll chat with you next week.